So we're getting closer to Fort Harrod now. We're like right across the street, and we're going to go in through the gate where we can see some of the reenactors. All right, you've got two rifles. So you said one's a smoothbore and one's rifled.
Yeah,
well, I should say you got two guns.
I've got one rifle, one smoothbore. Yeah.
I'm gonna guess the octagon. It's an octagon.
Yeah.
It's the rifle.
This is a 50 caliber. It's a Carolina style from the patch box. Earlier style, big wide butt. It's got a 42-inch barrel on it, and the barrel on this rifle is swamped.
What does that mean?
Swamped means, and a lot of your better quality guns of the 18th century were swamped. It's a three-dimensional barrel. It is large back here where you need it to be.
How would they have done that? How would they have bored it? Because I mean, I know they used to use like a hand drill to drill out the bore, right?
Well, that's aside from this is a finish on the outside of this octagon. They would file this to the point where it is fat back here.
Oh, you mean it's fat on the outside? I thought you meant the bore was fat.
No, on the outside. It's thin here in the middle, and then it flares back at the tip out here. Now, the old joke was that they did that to drive the stalker crazy, because he had to then inlet this barrel, which is three-dimensional, big, small, and it's that way on all sides. So basically it goes and then back out, and he had to inlet that all into a piece of wood and make it look like it was seamlessly placed in there. But that was...
I can see looking here that the wood itself is wider back there too.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a swamp barrel, 50 caliber. It's a flintlock. The flintlock from 1630 to 1830 was supreme. If you had a good gun, you had a flintlock. The Frenchman, basically looking at his fire kit, and that's kind of the way I explain it, which is flint and steel. That's the way we'd started fires for hundreds of years. He finally just figured out a way to bring the two things together into a mechanical.
I've seen these many times, but is there like a rough edge on the back of that, I would assume?
Not really. It gets a little rough on the frizz in there. It doesn't have to be, because the flint and the steel together, when they strike, you're going to get a spark if everything is working correctly. We should.
Oh yeah.
We got a decent spark on that one, and that flint's about worn out. I've been using it. It's about ready to fall out. There's no historical record, and we like to think about it. Kentucky has a lot of what we call flint, but it's actually chert. It's actually much softer. English flint is a much harder thing. This has got a black English flint in it. There's Tom Fuller still hand naps these, and most of us in here probably have a Tom Fuller flint in our rifles. Black English. French amber flints also are supposed to be supreme. These are cheaper, but that's what we use. But there's no historical record of people just picking up a piece of flint off the ground here in Kentucky and actually using it for a flint. You could, but it's soft, it wouldn't last very long.
So you get a few shots and have to replace it.
Even in the 18th century, it was a trade item. And we traded with England, and there was guys over there that it was their job and their duty in life to sit around and nap flints to fit all the different guns, and they got to the trading post out here. So if you were out here hunting, or before you headed out here, you got you a sack of flints, so many flints, so much powder, usually 4 to 1 ball lead to powder weight.
Now would you come out with a block of lead and then cut it up and make your own balls and use a mold, or
generally,
or would they usually get the balls pre-made?
There was, when we started, I said this is a 50 caliber rifle, and it is. And a lot of people say, well, what was the standard caliber? Well, there wasn't. The guy who made you the gun made you the bullet mold. And with their rifling procedures, depending on how many times they run
it might wobble
through the barrel, it might, they might be going for a 40 caliber and end up with a 38 or a 42, but they didn't care because
they made the bullet mold.
They made the bullet mold, and you got a mold with your new gun. So whatever it was, it's fine. Just don't lose the mold, That's
what I was thinking. If you lost your pack and your mold went away, you'd have a problem then.
Yeah, but You know, I've got in a pack back here. I've got bag molds, and I carry lead and a little melting ladle, and I can sit down here just like they did. And you know, I never run out of ball if I've got a little lead and my little pack with me. And it's easier to carry that way than it is in the round.
Right.
You know, after you molded it. So I think a lot of times that was camp chores. One day a week you're running ball.
Well, I got a question about, of course, a flintlock used powder inside the, what is it called? Well, there's a flint and then the lock?
Yeah. Well,
or flash pan.
The pan.
Pan.
Yeah.
Well, I see it's rounded and it's got an edge on it, but how well would that keep it from getting wet?
It wouldn't.
If it rained.
It wouldn't. Generally, what you do when it's wet is you lay a piece of leather over it. It's called a cow's knee. Generally, they like one with a little bevel, and the area from a cow's knee has that bend in it that they like, which would fit over this. But any kind of treated piece of leather with some beeswax melted and poured onto it, laying over this on a really wet day.
Try to keep it dry.
Yeah, we'll try to keep it dry.
So that when you fired or tried to fire, you got a explosion instead of nothing.
Right, and of course, you know, there's a lot of historical record of them going clatch. It happened. You know, that's what they call it when it doesn't go boom. It just goes clatch. But you know, they're more reliable than you think if you keep them dry. If you can keep a piece of leather over it, keep it under your arm, any way to keep that dry, and don't turn it up to where it rains down the barrel. You know, I've shot these on a lot of rainy days, and they're decently reliable.
Now that was going to bring me to the next question. Of course, the powder in the pan getting wet. What if the main charge doesn't go off? How do you get the ball and the charge out?
You have to pull it.
But how? I mean, I don't see anything on your rod. It looks like it would take it out. Your tamping rod.
No. You know, it depends on how tightly you load it, and I don't think the guys out here on the frontier in the 18th century, my opinion is they didn't load them real tightly. They used a patch round ball, but this rod would have to be sufficient to pull it out. Now I've got a big brass rod. It's a range rod, and screw a little deal on it, then you drive it, you ram it down in here, and you screw it into that ball. You know, you stick it in the forks of a tree or something strong enough, and you pull it as hard as you can. Pretty much, if that charge gets wet or doesn't go, you're down to that. Now, we have taken a vent pick and put a little powder here and slowly poke enough down in here to get a few grains to go boom to blow that out. So that's one option. Of course, that's another thing.
And then run your rod down to make sure that bullet's not stuck halfway down the barrel.
Right. Yeah, and of course that's another thing too. This is a smooth bore gun. This one's a rifle. Rifle, you used a patched round ball. Smooth bore, not necessarily. A lot of guys just dropped the ball down. The military didn't patch. You loaded a charge, and you dropped a ball
inside, and
down
then
the
just
barrel, and you didn't
took aim and shot.
Right, and you tried not to tip it down.
So your ball would roll out.
Yeah.
Well, that wouldn't be good. So it wouldn't be real good to shoot down on something then, would it?
No, you might have a ball in there and you might not. Of course, with the patch round ball, it's going to stay where it's supposed to.
Well, now with the tactics of like the fort back here where they were up high, that wouldn't be real effective then if you were trying to point down at an enemy coming up the hill at you.
Well, and a lot of times they did use other things. They would patch these instead of with a piece of cloth, which is generally what they use with the rifle. And what I do with this one sometimes, if you can find an old wasp nest or a hornet's nest hanging in the tree.
So it's basically like paper.
Yeah, that makes the best wadding. A hornet's nest, if you can find it, makes the best wadding for your smooth bore.
Preferably an uninhabited one.
Yeah. Get them in the fall when they're gone. They leave those in the fall, and they just leave them there for guys with smooth bore guns, I believe.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
This is a reproduction of a tape loom, and a tape is nothing more than like a drawstring. All the women's clothes will either be pinned on or tied on. Men got the buttons, women be getting buttons.
What, buttons really in the Civic?
Yeah, there were buttons and all, but women didn't wear them. Now, I do, but I'm wearing a man's shirt for the person I am, so I've got the buttons on his shirt. But no, the women didn't. If you looked at all the ladies' clothing.
Well, I know they use pins like the fancy dress clothing in the 17, 16, 1500s.
Yeah, but even a lot of the aprons that didn't go over the head, if you'll see half aprons, but if they're up like that, you'll see them pinned to the front of their shirts.
But they were like straight pins, right?
Straight pin. And they did have safety pins of a kind, but that's just not what they were doing. But everything else is tied on. The chemises will be tied here and there. The petticoats are tied on, aprons. The pockets are tied on separate. If you were one of the people who wore underwear, there was no elastic, so there's drawstrings in your underwear. Okay, everything was drawstrings. So most of them would be white, but you can't tell, and I'm a weaver. I weave and I have leftover yarn, so I like colors and patterns, but also we've used them for powder horn straps and different things
And
like
it's
that.
very strong, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this one's all cotton and all. I've done linen on this. I've got a linen one someplace, and this one linen is so grabby, and this one is so big and coarse. He made it, and I would make this smaller so there's not so much friction.
Right.
Also, for linen, probably you might wet it, because if you're weaving it on a big loom, you've got to keep wetting it. It's really inconvenient. So I use mostly cotton. I've done more.
It operates kind of like a regular loom. It looks like where it separates and you just run the shuttlecock back and forth.
That's
through.
very much. It's like a two-harness loom, but instead of going over and under, this one has a slot and a hole and a slot and a hole.
Oh, okay.
So what you do is everything in the hole stay there. So I bring it down, I put the shuttle through. This is my beater bar. Pack everything down. Okay, I pull it through. Now I'll go up. Everything on the bottom will now come to the top, and you go back through. Instead of going over and under one little thing at a
Come in a
time.
little closer so I can actually see what you're doing.
Yeah, let me put this out a little bit too. Okay. And it's sliding. Usually I have it on the stool down there, but it just goes over and under. Okay, so I go back through. That's your beater bar to kind of pack it down. Okay, and then now I'll take everything from the top and we'll go back to the bottom. Okay, so it's just like a two-harness loom. If you see Mr. Birch up here, he's got same thing. He's got a 4-harness, but you step on the treadles and all. So this is just a recreation of a tape loom, and it's 2-harness. It's it does similar to inkle weaving. Okay, the pattern, everything long on any loom is a warp, and what's on the shuttle that goes right and left is called weft. Goes white and weft, if you remember. But it's important because this is a warp.
That's the first time I've heard it pronounced weft. I've heard
It's
it
like
pronounced woof.
Woof, yeah.
Yeah, warp and woof.
Yeah, if you have even most in the country, and they'll do it, and they'll read it, and it's W-E-F-T, and they say woof. Okay, and that. But I do that because to remind people that go right and left. So most things like this was done on a loom, and you see both the warp and the weft to make the patterns. Well, okay. But anything you have, a lot of times you'll have that. Warp-faced weave is things like this, okay? So if this is the same thing. If this had red on the shuttle, all you'd see is that little stitch right there, weft. You wouldn't see any red, okay? It's warp. If you have Navajo-style rugs and all you see is the weft, the right and left, the wolf, okay? And it packs it down. You only see the warp threads on the end where you go. So you have to know what loom and what you're weaving. And that's why it's important to know warp and weft. This is called a tape loom because it's a drawstring, but these are tapes. And you just...
And it generates basically something that looks like a tape instead of like a bolt of cloth or something.
Yeah, and it's for drawstrings, powder horn straps. This is cotton, and that's relatively solid and all. So, and I can do this.
And it's real soft, of course, being
It's
cotton.
very soft for belts or whatever. It's 9 o'clock.
Evidently.
Yeah.
Courtesy of, and they are the British or who?
That probably is the Scottish Highlands guys.
Either way, they have a cannon.
They have a can, yeah.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Moisture out of it. Okay, I'm ready now if you're ready.
Okay.